She opened the safe on the day of her father's funeral. Not out of greed. Not out of curiosity. But because in his eyes, as he lay dying, she'd seen not a farewell, but a warning. A faint, trembling look filled with something he'd never been able to say aloud. And now, standing alone in the empty house, still scented with medicine and lilacs from the garden, Margaret inserted the key he'd once handed her with quiet words, just in case. The lock clicked. Inside wasn't a collection of rare coins or a stack of stock certificates. Inside lay a letter, addressed to her, and a thin envelope marked, "If you're reading this, nothing went the way I'd hoped." Margaret Holland was 62. She'd been born and lived her entire life in a quiet Chicago suburb where leaves turned gold right on schedule and neighbors knew whose dog barked too loud at dawn. Her father, William Holland, was a man of few words but dependable deeds. Her mother had died young. Margaret was only 15. From then on, father and daughter lived together like two ships in a calm harbor, not always understanding each other, but staying close. But her brother had always been different. Thomas, 5 years younger, charismatic, gifted at persuasion even when he was wrong, had left for California at 20 and only returned a decade later for their mother's funeral. Then he vanished again. He'd show up once a year, always needing something, borrowing Dad's car for repairs, taking old tools, the family photo album. Each time, he'd drive off with a promise to return it. He never did. Margaret stayed silent. Not because she forgave, but because she believed family feuds were noise that destroyed what could still be saved. Her father stayed silent with her. But now, holding the letter in her hands, she understood. Silence was also a choice. And sometimes, the most dangerous one. The letter was brief, written in a shaky hand as if William knew his time was running out. "Margaret, if you're reading this, know this. I've left you everything, the house, the savings, even the old Cadillac. But that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is what Thomas did to your daughter, Emily, 10 years ago. He knew you'd never find out. And I couldn't bring myself to tell you. Forgive me. Now you must decide, keep silent or give the truth a chance." Margaret swayed. Emily, her daughter, smart, strong, independent. Everything had changed in a single year when she was 18. She'd left for college in another state, then abruptly dropped out, came home, shut down, stopped talking about the future. Margaret had assumed it was a teenage crisis. But what if it had been something else? She stepped onto the back porch where her father used to drink his morning coffee. The air was crisp, September cool. She clenched the letter in her fist. One question pounded in her head. What did Thomas do? She called Emily that evening. She lived in Boston, worked as an architect, rarely phoned, but always warmly. This time, her daughter's voice trembled. "Mom, you read the letter?" "Yes. Did you know?" A long pause. Then a quiet sigh. "I didn't want you to find out. Especially not after Grandpa died. He tried to make it right. Sent money to Tom, threatened him, begged him. But Tom just laughed." "What happened, Emily?" Margaret whispered. "He was with me when I visited him in California. I thought he wanted to help with college. And then, he said it was a family debt." Her voice broke. Margaret closed her eyes. A lump rose in her throat. Ice filled her chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you would have killed him. And I couldn't. I couldn't burden you with that too. You'd already given me everything." But now the pain was shared. And silence meant betraying them both. Thomas arrived 3 days later. As always, in an expensive car, an expensive suit, with a faint smirk. "Well, sis," he said, walking into the house, "hope you didn't sell Dad's whiskey collection? I'd love to treat some old friends." He didn't notice the change in her face. Didn't see that the quiet obedience in her eyes was gone. "I knew you'd come back someday," she said. "But I didn't think it'd be this soon." "Why wait?" He strode into the living room and tossed his bag on the sofa. "Dad left everything to you, right? Hope you didn't forget I'm his child, too." "You're not a child, Thomas. You're a predator. And I know what you did to Emily." Silence filled the room. He froze, then turned slowly. "What are you talking about?" "You raped your own niece. You took advantage of her trust. And Dad knew, but stayed silent to protect me from the truth. Thomas's face twisted. The smirk vanished. You're listening to a teenager's nonsense? Emily was always dramatic. Maybe she made it all up for attention? She dropped out of college, Thomas. Stopped dreaming. Then, tried to kill herself. You think that's nonsense? He stepped closer, his voice low and venomous. You can't prove anything. It's been 10 years. No witnesses. No evidence. And if you start talking, I'll say you're just bitter because I was always Dad's favorite. You're wrong, Margaret said. I'm not going to the police. I know how that works. But I'll do something else. She walked to the desk and pulled a folder from the drawer. Inside, bank statements, copied letters, screenshots of messages between her father and Thomas. In one, Thomas had written, "If you want me to keep quiet about the money you sent to my ex-wife, stay out of my business." Dad paid you to keep your debt secret, Margaret said. But in return, he demanded you never go near Emily again. You broke that promise. And now I'll break your silence. You wouldn't dare. I will. Tomorrow, I'm sending all of this to your wife, your children, your employer, everyone who thinks you're a decent man. Thomas paled. You'll ruin my life. Just like you ruined my daughter's. He lunged for the folder. Margaret stepped back, but she wasn't afraid. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. Leave, Thomas. And if you ever come near Emily or her children again, I'll do far more than just tell the truth. He left that same night. Without his suitcase. Without goodbye. Just got in his car and drove off, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne and silence. A week later, a letter arrived from his wife. She was filing for divorce. The children were shattered. I don't recognize the man I lived with for 20 years, she wrote. Margaret replied with one sentence, neither do I. Emily came 2 weeks later, bringing her 5-year-old daughter, Lila, her eyes the same as her mother's. They sat on the same back porch where Margaret had read her father's letter. Thank you, Mom, Emily said softly, for not leaving me alone with this. I was always with you, Margaret replied. I just didn't know the truth. Now you do. And that's something. It's everything, Margaret said. The truth is all we have left when family breaks. She didn't sell the house. Didn't split the inheritance. Everything stayed with her, not out of greed, but out of respect for her father, who'd tried until the end to shield her from a truth he didn't know would be her only path to healing. Thomas never returned. Rumors followed, lost his job, moved to another state, lives alone. Margaret didn't look for him. She knew his punishment was his own loneliness. And her reward was her daughter's trust, restored after 10 years of silence. One evening, while Lila slept and Emily made tea in the kitchen, Margaret found her father's old notebook in a drawer. On the last page, a note. Silence isn't peace. Silence is a wound covered with a bandage. She smiled. For the first time in a long while, truly smiled. Because a wound only heals when it's finally opened.